My name is Alex. We're going to talk about drugs and alcohol today. We're going to talk especially about tobacco. Here's what I want to do. I want you to understand what a drug is. And all drugs have things in common with every other drug, and that's what makes them a drug. So I want you to know what is common from drug to drug to drug to drug to drug. I want you to understand very clearly the ways that drugs can be harmful to you. I mean, you've grown up hearing the drugs are bad for you. No one ever explained to you why. I want to try and make sure you understand why. Some people who use drugs will be unable to stop using drugs. That's actually a small minority of people. Most people who try drugs can leave them alone. But we know that some people, when they try drugs, continue to use them. They continue to use them even though it's causing them trouble. And when they try and stop, they can't stay stopped or can't stop. You need to understand why that is. You need to understand why it is that some people can get addicted, other people don't, and why those people who get addicted can't stop. Then we're going to spend some time talking about how do you know, or how could you talk to a friend, how could you ask to teach your friends or your parents or somebody else if they could get this. In other words, if it's a disease, we're talking about addiction. After today, I would be really pleased if you could have the ability, if you had learned enough, that you could sit with one of your friends and say, today I learned about addiction is a disease, here's what the disease is, here's how you get it, here's why some people get it and others don't, and here's what you can do if you think you're getting it. And that's really what I want you to be able to do today. So today I'm going to teach you guys to be teachers, and my hope is that after this morning you'll find somebody, grab them, who's smoking, go, wait a minute, and teach them about what you learned today. Is that fair? Now, because some of this language may not be familiar to you, if I use a word you don't understand, or if I say something in some concept you don't get it, it's fair to say, what? Or something like that. Let me know if you didn't get it. Is that okay, Nick? Is that okay, Javier? Is that okay? Everybody understand? Because I'm not going to be bothered if you say I didn't understand that, or could you clarify that? Because the way I like to teach is I ask you questions and you answer them, and then I go back and forth with you. Don't be embarrassed if I ask you a question. If you get the question wrong, we'll just cut your head off. I mean, there's no problem. I mean, it's either you get it right or you're dead. No pressure. Okay, right? Okay. This is me, and Newly Treatment Center is where I work. I'm the medical director there, which means that I'm the doctor who sees people with drug and alcohol problems who come in and they're asking for help. We treat tobacco addicts, we treat Oxy, Vicodin, Ativan, heroin, alcohol, methamphetamine. You name a drug, we try and develop a way of helping people get off of them and stay off of them. And that's what we do at the center. And we would teach our patients the exact same things I'm teaching you. In other words, everybody who's interested in the disease, who might get the disease, who has the disease, they need to know, all need to know the same thing. I mean, how are you going to get well if you don't even know what's wrong, right? All right, let me show you the first slide. This is called the pleasure scale, the pleasure scale. We're not used to thinking of pleasure as a separate concept, but in fact, in each of your brains, there are two parts of your brains that when they're active, when those two brain parts are active, you feel good. They're called your pleasure centers. In a minute, we're going to talk about why you need pleasure centers. But first, you need to know that there are pleasure centers. Now, if you look at the pleasure scale, what this means is that, let's say you've got these parts of your brain that are pleasure centers, and when they're active. So let's say as you sit here right now, you just feel okay. You're not high, you're not low, you're just okay. Now, there are things you can do to turn on your pleasure centers. And these are called natural highs, or simple pleasures. They're the kind of things you usually enjoy, the kind of things you like to do. So if you were here and you wanted to feel good, what would you do? What would you do? What would you do? Let's say you're bored and you want to do something, you want to feel better, what would you do?
To be truthful, probably go drink or something.
Go drink or something. Okay, and that'll guarantee you to work. How about that? What would you do?
Smoke a cigarette.
Smoke a cigarette, what would you do?
Smoke a bowl.
Smoke a bowl, okay? So you're in the normal range and you want to feel better, so you could do stuff to feel good. Now, if you weren't using drugs and alcohol, for example, here, you might just go for a walk or play a video game or watch a movie. So you're normal, but you want to feel better, so say you watch a movie. Now, if I turn your pleasure centers on a little more, in addition to feeling good, you'd start to get interested in things. If you're interested in something, your pleasure centers are active. So let's say you're interested in a good book or hearing what your friend has to say. In order for you to be interested in what your friend is saying, your brain chemistry for pleasure has to activate. And that's how you are allowed to be interested. Your brain chemistry is active and now you're interested. If you wanted to have more pleasure, you could have really good food or really good sex, or you could watch something that was really exciting. Now, the term euphoria means that your pleasure center is full on. It's full active. That's all the pleasure your brain can get. Most people don't get euphoria very often, and it's not something we experience that often. But say you are going to graduate from someplace, or you just got a big award, or you just finished an amazing project. It was really tough. You know that really excited, elated feeling like, wow, that's called euphoria. And it means that your pleasure centers are really turned on and they're giving you a lot of pleasure. With me so far? We also know that your pleasure centers can be underactive. So for example, if you are in a bad mood, you didn't get any sleep, you feel negative. Any of you ever feel negative? Wow. Now if you had even less activity in your pleasure centers, you'd be bored. Notice that these are opposites, right? A little activity, you feel good. A little underactivity, you feel negative. Extra activity, you're interested. If it's too low, you're bored. So interest and bored are opposites. Pleasure has as its opposite this term, anhedonia. That means no pleasure. That means your pleasure centers lose the ability to generate a good feeling. And everybody, by the time they're your age, has gone through periods of life where there was no pleasure in your life at all. So you can remember times where it was just flat, boring, empty, just awful. The worst you can feel is the opposite of euphoria. And it's not like sad mood or depression, it's more like a bad mood. It's like, oh, what are you looking at? Don't look at me. I hate it when you look at me. You ever felt like that? That's called dysphoria. It's the opposite of euphoria. So, have you ever been depressed? If you've ever been depressed, you know, because when you're depressed, you can't enjoy anything. So the time most of us have experienced anhedonia, no pleasure, is when we're really depressed. And that's, you can't enjoy yourself when you're depressed. And that's a common time for people to lose pleasure in their life. This is the system drugs work on. Drugs work on this system. Drugs vary in how strong they are. By strong, I mean how much pleasure can they give you. So if you look at this scale, the weakest pleasure stimulator is tobacco. And when you smoke tobacco, you feel good. And if you look at that good feeling, tobacco does more. It actually makes you feel alert, makes you calm, takes away your anxiety, makes your brain sharp. So it does a lot of things, makes you feel good. If you look at weed, it's strong enough to activate your pleasure centers so everything is interesting. You know how when you're high, everything's interesting, the back of your eyelids are interesting, your toenails are interesting, the walls are interesting, everything's interesting. I mean, that's what weed does. It takes things that are not interesting and makes them interesting. So it's strong enough so that if you're high, so for example, you don't like your class, you're hating it, you're just bored out of your tree. You know, if you do a bowl, Pretty interesting class. Of course, you might not remember anything, but it was an interesting class at the same time. Alcohol is strong enough to produce pleasure. It's a more powerful drug. And you know, if you've ever like had 2 or 3 shots, it comes on, you go, woo, you giggle and you laugh, you feel good. That's pure pleasure. Now, euphoria is unusual in sober life, but there are some drugs that'll give you euphoria every time you try. Anyone know what I mean? Meth. Meth will always give you euphoria, especially if you smoke it or if you shoot it. OxyContin, all the painkillers can give you amazing euphoria. Cocaine, especially if you smoke it or you shoot it, amazing euphoria. And some people, when they hear me say, wow, drugs give you pleasure, go, you're glorifying drugs. No, not. We just need to know what drugs do. And one of the things drugs do is they make you feel really, really good. That's what a drug is. So we're not saying use them to feel good. I just want you to know what drugs are, right? If things make you feel good. So you can actually get euphoria, say if you're a methamphetamine user and you smoke meth. Any of you guys know meth smokers? Any of you meth smoker? I mean, they can get euphoria 20 times a day. You know, they just take a hit off the pipe and boop, la la land, and they're just all over the place with terrific pleasure. Now, if that was what we knew about drugs, you take them into your body, they go into your bloodstream, they get into your brain, they reach the pleasure centers of the brain, they turn on the pleasure centers, and you get high. You get pleasure. High and pleasure mean the same thing. Now, if that's what we knew about drugs, why wouldn't we just stop and go get high? I mean, here's all this pleasure, why don't we just go get high? Javier, why don't we just go get high? I mean, think of it. 20 times a day, you can have maximum pleasure go off in your head. Boom, fireworks.
Because at the same time, it's ruining your life. So.
Why don't we just go get high? Not a bad answer, Javier.
Because it's just bad for you and it like
Why?
breaks everything down and before you know it, everything that you have is gone. And
Good
it hurts
answer.
your family and stuff.
Why don't we just go get high?
What happens when you have nothing else to get high on pretty much?
Ah, good answer. Y'all know people who use powerful drugs, right? The big ones, the euphoric ones. Are they dancing in the aisles and having a great time? What's wrong? No money, no home, plenty of pleasure, right? So you're all on the right track. I mean, obviously. If drugs were a free ride, we would just go get high. But we all know it's not a free ride. And one of the things that I think it's important to understand is, why are they bad for you? Why are they bad for you? If you look at this slide, I'll give you the answer why they're bad for you. Let's say you're using weed, or let's say you're using alcohol. You're using it, you're using it, you're using it. Eventually you'll reach a point where the amount you're using doesn't get as high as it used to. Have you seen that happen? Have you reached that point yet? Where it takes more to get high than it used to? Have you seen that? So one of the problems with using drugs is the amount you used to use stops working, you need to use more. Now, if you reach that point and stop, you don't go back to normal. The thing to realize about drugs is once you've reached the point where you don't get as high as you used to and now you stop, the way you feel when you're not high is no longer the way you used to feel when you're not high. Here's the rule. You go as low as you got high. You go as low as you got high. So for example, if you look at tobacco smokers, you guys are experts on this, you feel good when you smoke. But when you stop smoking, you don't go back to normal. You feel negative instead of positive, right? If you're a weed smoker and you use it and you like weed, when you stop, you don't go back to normal. What do you get? Bored. You've all experienced this. You all know what I'm talking about. If you drink alcohol and you reach the point where the alcohol you used to use doesn't work anymore, you stop. You can't enjoy yourself. You lose pleasure. What are you going to do?
Drink.
Drink, that's the right answer. Okay, now if you're using drugs that produce euphoria, when you stop, keep in mind this fact. Dysphoria isn't tolerable. Nobody can stand being dysphoric. You've seen people coming down from meth. They're awful. They can't stand how they feel. They're out of their accord. And that's dysphoria. So they pay a really high price for the euphoria they got. Now, one of the things if you talk with a meth user, they love the high. But when they stop using, whoa, they go to the opposite of high. What do they want to do then? They're desperate to use. They're frantic to use, right? You've seen that? They're just going crazy to use because nobody can take this. Nobody can stand this. So, go a little further. Stand back. And the question I would ask you, why do we have pleasure in our brains? Why do we have pleasure in our brains?
To enjoy the things we like doing.
To enjoy things. To be interested in things. What else? Here's a good way of thinking about it. What if you had no pleasure? What would your life be like? Not fun. Okay, so if you ask a scientist why we have pleasure, scientists would say, well, it rewards us for going after food, going after sex, seeking people who will be kind to us. Let's see if I can give you a technical explanation. Let's suppose you were a worm, and I put you in a dish, and you were a hungry worm. And I put a little piece of food in the corner of the dish. Now, as you start to find the food in the dish, the pleasure centers in that worm brain would light up. And that lighting up would say, you found some food. And as you got closer to the food, you'd get more pleasure, like you're on the right track. You know that game, like you're cold, you're warm? So as you got closer to the food, your brain would go, yeah, you're on the right track. When you finally got the food, the pleasure centers would go, hooray! And you get tremendous, yummy for the tummy, all that great stuff. Now, if I took a chemical and destroyed the pleasure centers of that worm, and I put a little piece of food in the dish, the animal would wander around the dish and couldn't find the food. It could bump into it and wouldn't know it was food because the signal that you found food wouldn't turn on. The worm would starve to death. So the pleasure centers, when it comes to food, is essential to live. You ever been hungry? What happens when you're hungry? You go after food. What if there isn't any food? You find food, right? So we have to do it. And the pleasure center, the pleasure center tells us when we're doing the right thing, moving towards stuff that are good for us, motivates us to get that good stuff. If you look at what the pleasure does, it rewards us for going after food and after sex and after being with people. That's what nurture means. We also know that if you're paying attention to something, that means your brain is found enough interest in it that you're paying attention. Is it harder or easier to pay attention to things that are interesting? It's a lot easier. Hard to pay attention to things that are boring. So the pleasure system, when it sees, say, a book or a really pretty girl or a boy or whatever you like, the pleasure center turns on, you pay attention to it, right? If you're enjoying yourself, let's say you go to a movie and it's so good, that means your pleasure center got turned on by watching a movie. You enjoyed it. That's what enjoyment means. If you look at monkeys, apes, orangutans, chimpanzees, humans, those are called social creatures, right? They run in packs. Animals that run in packs activate their pleasure centers when they're with people. Would you rather be alone or with people, Sadie?
With people.
With people. Would you rather be alone or with people?
With people.
Do you feel good when you're with people? Mm-hmm. That means that, like normal humans, you get pleasure being with people. And that's part of what makes social communities work. We like being with each other. We enjoy it. If say you get a good massage, or suppose you are just really in love, or suppose you're thinking about graduation or something, the pleasure you get from that means that your pleasure center's turned on. If you're interested in something, or how valuable, how important things are, In other words, if you stand back, the pleasure centers are active in all the different things we do. They're really active in the things that make it possible for us to live. That's the system drugs work on. Drugs turn on it and do all these things. Okay, here's a question. And I've already answered the question, so let me see if you got what I was getting at. Danielle, what's a drug? Tobacco, alcohol, weed, meth, coke, those are all examples, right? What are they? What do they do?
They get you addicted.
Not initially. You know, when kids are using drugs, hey, hobby, they want to get addicted? No. So that's not why people use drugs. Why do they use drugs?
To give you pleasure, make you enjoy it.
That's the answer. A drug is a pleasure-producing chemical. All drugs, to be a drug, to qualify as a drug, you have to be able to show that it makes you feel good. And all drugs make you feel good because they get to the pleasure centers and turn it on. That's what a drug is. And so instead of good food or good sex or a walk in the forest, you just take a hit off of whatever it is, goes into your blood, gets to your brain, gets the pleasure centers, boop, and you feel good. It's free. So drugs activate the system we've been talking about. Now, that sentence, the next sentence says, drugs activate the chemical pathways in the brain associated with those feelings. So that's the definition of a drug. And as we said, some drugs activate a little bit, like tobacco, some of it maximal, like meth or oxy or something like that. But they all do the same thing. They do other things, but all drugs do that one thing, and that's what makes them a drug. This isn't just a theory. This is where it lives. In this slide, we take it, this is a rat brain. None of you qualify. This is a human brain. And what you've done is divide the brain, so you're looking at it from the side, okay? So like if we were looking at Sadie, we would be looking at her brain from the side. And if you look at it, deep in the middle of the brain, like really in the middle of the brain, is a part of the brain that kind of keeps an eye on what's going on in your body and in the environment. And something that's pleasurable, or could be pleasurable, this part of the brain picks it up and sends a signal to what we used to call the pleasure center. But we now know that there are two of them. One of them in the middle of the brain. And if this gets active, boy, you feel good. This is a new part of the system that was just discovered. This part of the brain right here, from here, anyone know what that part of the brain is? That's the part of the brain that makes decisions. That's the part of the brain that decides if you're going to do it or not do it. So one of the questions that we need to consider is how come you have a pleasure system? How come you have a pleasure center right in the middle of the part of the brain that makes decisions? It's a good question, isn't it? But there's a lot of information on this slide. Before I go through it, and there's three terms I want you guys to understand. And I want you to say them. The first one is called neuroadaptation. Say it. Neuroadaptation. Say it. Say it. Neuroadaptation. Second term is tolerance. Say it. Third one is withdrawal. Those three words are the problem with drugs. If someone comes up and says, why are drugs bad for you? The answer is neuroadaptation, tolerance, and withdrawal. Before I go through this slide, let me give you an example. Any of you ever been to a really loud concert? Have you? Have you stood near the speakers? What happens to your hearing?
Like it's hard to hear when you're.
What?
It's hard to hear.
What? What? You hear what she said? She said now in this example, she went to a loud place, she exposed her hearing to really loud noise, and like a lot of people, she realized afterwards she was kind of hard of hearing. And it came back after a while, so after a while, your hearing was okay. But you're absolutely correct. If you overdo it with loud sound for a period of time, you're hard of hearing. You had that experience? Now that's a very common observation. And here's what it means. Built into your brains is a really important protective step. And in the example I'm giving you, loud sound could destroy your hearing. So before that happens, your brain protects you from going deaf. And it protects you by becoming insensitive to sound. So that if you get too loud of a sound, your brain goes, oops, too loud, and your ears get protected by becoming partly deaf. And it'll come back after a couple hours. Now what you need to know is if she went to a concert more than 3 out of any 7 days, 4 or more days out of a week, that temporary protection would become permanent. She would have a disease of hearing. What's it called? Deaf. She'd have deafness, right? So let's start again. She goes to a loud environment. She gets exposed to loud sound. Her brain protects her hearing by basically putting mufflers on. And that, after the sound goes away, it'll come back. She's been protected. But if she does it over and over and over, that temporary protection becomes permanent. She now can't hear usual sound. She can only hear loud sound, right? You see where I'm going with this? Let's talk about drugs. Now, instead of loud sound, we're talking about loud drugs. And let's say, Javier, you went on a big drunk this weekend. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you were knee-walking drunk, barfing everything, the whole thing. Now, if you were paying attention, and we could measure it, if he drank, say, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, way too much, if we could measure it Monday, Tuesday, probably Monday and Tuesday, he would have trouble with pleasure. He'd have trouble with interest. He'd have trouble enjoying himself. He'd have trouble paying attention. He would be bored. He would be negative. He overdid it. Now, that decrease in pleasure after a weekend of drinking protects you. Now, if he got drunk more than 3 out of 7 days, 4 or more days, and he did it for 2 weeks, that temporary empty pleasure that would be the result of you drinking too much, that decrease in pleasure would become permanent. You wouldn't be able to hear your normal pleasure. You would be deaf to normal pleasure. Okay, take a second, guys. Imagine all the things you enjoy, all the things you love to do, the things that are fun, things you can't wait to do. Got it? Wipe them out. Imagine you could have none of that. It was gone. How you doing? You like that? Welcome to the first day of addiction. Because once you become deaf to pleasure, you're not normal anymore. From that point forward, you're at least going to be bored. And worse than that, you may be very negative. You might feel no pleasure. So the problem with overusing drugs, you get a lot of pleasure when you use them. But if you overdo them, it takes away from you the ability to have any pleasure. And if you're in my office where I treat drug addicts and alcoholics, it's the saddest thing because they can't enjoy anything at all. At all. Nothing is pleasurable. Except what? When is a pleasure?
When they get that drug, right?
When they get high. So they come to depend on the drug, right? So let's start at the beginning. They're using, they wipe out their pleasure centers. Now they can't hear pleasure. The only time they get any pleasure is when they use the drug. But it's making it worse at the same time, right? So they're getting pleasure, but they're making it worse. So every single time they use, it's a bonk to the pleasure system. And when they stop, they don't go back to normal. They go the opposite direction. And it becomes the way they feel most of the time. And for those of you who smoke or who smoke weed or who have used a lot of alcohol or used pills, you know what it means to have no pleasure. I mean, you all know it. You've all been there. And it really is a difficult thing to go through day in, day out, with nothing enjoyable. Been there? You been there? You been there? You been there? Do you like it? Did you know that? Did you know that drugs take away your ability to enjoy yourself? That you can eventually only enjoy yourself when you're high? Well, let me take you through the science, because the three terms we use, neuroadaptation, tolerance, and withdrawal, are the scientific terms for what we just talked about. If I was giving a lecture to scientists, I would say that if you overdo it, in other words, overstimulate your pleasure centers, that overstimulation would induce a change in your brain, and the name of that change would be called neuroadaptation. So in direct response to the loud pleasure, the repetitive, over and over and over pleasure, the brain regions become insensitive. They stop working. They become unresponsive. Your pleasure centers go deaf. And that is the big problem. That's called neuroadaptation. How do you know with one question whether your brain is normal or diseased? Now, I just introduced the term disease. Remember when we were talking about if you overdid your hearing over and over and over, your loss of hearing would become fixed, become permanent. You'd have a disease of hearing called deafness, right? If you overstimulate your pleasure centers, they go deaf. And the name of the state that you're in with a deaf pleasure center, that's called addiction. Addiction is a disease of the pleasure system. You get the disease by overdoing it, overdoing it, overdoing it. So, how do you know with one question if your brain is normal or diseased? Anybody know? One question. Answers here. Sadie, what is it?
Try to enjoy something.
Well, that's true. Try and enjoy something, and you can't. You say, this is a drag. I need a drink. I need a bowl. I need to smoke. Because I can't enjoy myself unless I do. It's not what I'm getting at. With one question, how can you know if you have a disease of the brain or a normal brain?
When you have to keep losing more.
That's the answer. That is exactly the right answer. The amount, so if you use the example of sound, what you used to hear, you can't hear. And the only way you can hear is a louder sound. She just said it in the drug terms. The amount that used to get you high doesn't work anymore. She has to go to a louder dose to hear the high. Follow me? Follow me? So she's absolutely right. That's called tolerance. So if you want to ask your friends, you have a normal brain or a disease in your brain, ask a simple question, does the amount that used to get you high still get you high? If the answer is no, it takes me more to get high than it used to, you now know with medical fact your brain has a disease in it. Now the thing that's a bummer about the disease isn't that it takes you more to get high. Yeah, you have to buy more weed to get high. That's not the point. The point is everybody who needs more to get high doesn't feel normal when they stop. They go as low as they were high. So if you look at weed, you get high, you get interested. Wow, ooh, ooh, look at those. Ooh, that's very interesting. Ooh, it's my fingernails, want to see? Now, after a while, if I stop smoking weed, in other words, I have to get more, smoke more, smoke more. It used to be I could take a hit, now I need a whole bowl. Now I need 3 bowls, you know, whatever. If I stop, I don't go back to normal. I go the opposite direction. And from weed, I'll go into boredom. And the thing, I mean, I'm around potheads all day. I treat lots of potheads. And one of the things they all complain about is nothing is interesting. Nothing is interesting. Everything's boring. They can't pay attention. They don't enjoy themselves. They don't want to do anything. Everything's boring. They burnt out their pleasure centers.
You're used to having like the addiction so pleasurable to you. Once you're completely done, it's like you don't even know how to have fun anymore without it.
That is exactly 100% right. You can't have fun without it. You depend on it. The medical term for that's called a dependency. You've developed a dependency. That you can't enjoy yourself because you depend on the drug to enjoy yourself. You're absolutely right, Danielle. You get it. That's exactly right. So if we go back to the pleasure scale, it's what I showed you before. You're smoking, you're smoking, you're smoking. When you stop, you can't enjoy yourself. And I'm not saying you go to boredom. I'm saying you can't not go to boredom because the chemistry that will let you get interested is burnt out. You with me? So the sober state of someone who has developed tolerance to drugs, that sober state's not normal. It's the opposite of how they felt when they're high. The name for that is called withdrawal. So once you're tolerant and stop, you will always, 100% of the time, you will have withdrawal symptoms. And withdrawal symptoms are the exact opposite of what the drug does. So if the drug made you interested, you can't get interested. If the drug made you enjoy yourself, you can't enjoy yourself. If the drug makes you laugh, you can't laugh. If the drug made you sleepy, you can't sleep. If the drug made you high, you can't be high. And the dilemma for people who have developed tolerance to any drug is tolerating how you feel when you're not high. How do you tolerate the way you feel when you're not high? You like it? You like being sober?
Yeah.
You like being sober? Good. Do you notice a difference when you're sober over high? I mean, do you notice a difference in your interest level, your attention level?
Yeah, when I drink, I have a lot more fun.
How about when you're sober?
No, not at all.
Opposite. Bored. Well, that's the problem. Does everybody get this point? I mean, it is so basic. We really shouldn't go any further if you don't understand why drugs are bad for you. Drugs are bad for you because initially they make you feel good, but then they take away your ability to feel good by burning out the chemistry that makes you feel good. Any questions on that? We really shouldn't go further. If you don't understand, drugs are bad for you because they take away pleasure. You get pleasure today, you can't have it tomorrow. If you overdo it today, you won't have any tomorrow. And it lasts a long time before you get it back. Long, 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 long time. Now, suppose somebody's burned out their pleasure center.